What if a lost letter from Princess Diana to Prince Philip revealed hidden truths about her struggles within the royal family? Diana's words, captured in interviews and private notes, exposed her isolation and pain. Now, this newly uncovered letter raises questions. Was she seeking guidance, closure, or a final acknowledgement? And why has it remained hidden until now? Let's get into details. Princess Diana's words have always held a certain power, even decades after her passing. From her heartfelt interviews to the handwritten notes she left behind, every piece of her story reveals more about her struggles within the royal family. Recently, a previously overlooked letter written by Diana to Prince Philip has surfaced, drawing renewed attention to her final years as a royal. While Prince Philip's letters to Diana during her marital crisis with Charles are well documented, little has been said about what Diana may have written to him in response. The emergence of this letter forces us to re-examine her relationship with her father-in-law and question whether Philip was a source of guidance, a critic, or perhaps both. The letter's existence is not entirely surprising. Diana was known for putting her thoughts into writing, especially during the most difficult periods of her life. Many of her personal letters, later revealed to the public, have given insight into her isolation, her marriage's breakdown, and the weight of royal expectations. She often turned to trusted confidants to express herself, knowing that spoken words could be twisted or misinterpreted in ways that written ones could not. Unlike other royals who operated through official statements and carefully crafted speeches, Diana had a habit of speaking plainly and honestly, often choosing letters as a way to make herself heard when she felt silenced. To understand the significance of this newly discovered letter, it is important to first examine Diana's relationship with Prince Philip. Their dynamic was complex, shaped by both tradition and personal expectations. As the Queen's consort, Philip had long been a figure of authority within the royal family, enforcing its values and ensuring that its members adhered to a strict sense of duty. He had lived through scandal, war, and public scrutiny, all while standing firmly beside the Queen. For Diana, who entered royal life as a young woman barely out of her teenage years, Philip's presence must have felt both reassuring and intimidating. Initially, he was said to have welcomed her into the family, believing she would bring fresh energy to the monarchy. However, as her marriage to Charles unraveled, so too did Philip's perception of her role within the institution. There is clear evidence that Philip was involved in trying to mediate between Charles and Diana, particularly in the early 90s when their separation became inevitable. Letters between the two, made public years later, show that Philip did not shy away from addressing the crisis. He acknowledged that Charles had been unfaithful, and according to one letter, even suggested that if Diana had not been willing to stay in the marriage, she should opt out. While this showed a level of frankness uncommon in the royal family, it also underscored the expectation that duty should come before personal happiness. Philip had little patience for public drama, and Diana's willingness to speak openly about her struggles did not align with the traditional royal approach to handling problems privately. Diana, however, saw things differently. She was a woman who wore her emotions openly, both in public and in private. Unlike Philip, who had endured personal struggles in silence, she chose to let the world know what she was experiencing. By the time she sat down for her now infamous BBC Panorama interview in 1995, she had already been through years of emotional turmoil, and there was no going back. The interview made headlines across the world. In it, she revealed just how much she had struggled behind palace doors, famously stating, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The admission that Charles had resumed his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles was no secret to those within the palace. But for the public, hearing it directly from Diana was a turning point. What must Philip have thought upon seeing that interview? His stance had always been to keep family matters within the confines of the palace, yet here was his daughter-in-law exposing some of the monarchy's most private issues on national television. It is difficult to say whether this moment further distanced Philip and Diana, or if it prompted an even more candid exchange between them. Given what is known about Diana's personality and her preference for written communication, it is reasonable to assume that she put her thoughts down on paper in response to the increasing tension surrounding her marriage and her place in the royal family. The letter that has now surfaced is believed to have been written sometime between late 1995 and early 1996. This was a defining period for Diana, as it marked the months leading up to her divorce from Charles. By then, she had lost much of the royal support she had once had, with many in the establishment viewing her as unpredictable and difficult. She had been stripped of her title of Her Royal Highness and had effectively become an outsider, despite still being the mother of the future king. The royal family's cold approach to her struggles had left her feeling abandoned, a sentiment she expressed in many of her writings. Diana had long believed that she had few allies within the royal household. This was evident from the recordings she secretly provided to journalist Andrew Morton, which later formed the basis of his book, Diana, Her True Story. These recordings captured the depth of her despair and frustration, particularly in her marriage. She spoke candidly about the reality of life behind palace walls, describing a world in which she felt unwelcome and unloved. She detailed her struggles with bulimia, explaining that it had become a coping mechanism in response to the stress of her life as a royal. The book's release in 1992 was a seismic moment, as it gave the world an unfiltered look at Diana's reality. It is within this context that the letter to Philip gains significance. By this time, Diana had been vocal about her difficulties, yet there were still figures within the royal family she had hoped to reach in a more personal manner. Philip, despite his often blunt approach, had at least acknowledged the dysfunction in her marriage, something that others in the family rarely did publicly. If Diana wrote to him during this period, it was likely an attempt to address her position directly with someone who held influence within the monarchy. What exactly she expressed in that letter remains a matter of speculation, but given her history of written communication, certain themes are almost inevitable. Diana was not one to withhold her feelings when writing to those she trusted. She may have articulated her frustrations, her belief that the royal family had abandoned her, or her fears about what the future held for her outside of the royal institution. Perhaps she sought reassurance that she would still be respected despite stepping away from her marriage to Charles. While it is unclear whether Philip ever responded to this particular letter, his known letters to Diana suggest that he was willing to engage in frank discussions with her. He had once written that he did not understand Charles's decision to pursue Camilla while still married to Diana, an admission that showed he was at least aware of how badly the situation had been handled. However, Philip was also a man of tradition, and his patience with Diana's public approach to royal issues had its limits. He was unlikely to have fully approved of her decision to speak so openly about her struggles, even if he sympathized with her situation on some level. As Diana approached the final stages of her royal life, the gap between her and the monarchy widened further. She had given up her official role, but she was still one of the most recognizable figures in the world. Her charity work had become her new focus, and she was intent on building a life for herself beyond the constraints of palace expectations. However, the royal family's influence remained ever present, and Diana knew that any misstep could lead to further distancing. If her letter to Philip was indeed written as an attempt to clarify her position, it may have been one of her last efforts to maintain a connection with the institution she had once been part of. Diana's ability to express herself in writing gave her a voice at times when she felt silenced by those around her. This letter, like many of her others, may serve as yet another window into the thoughts of a woman who reshaped the image of the modern monarchy. But as with much of Diana's story, it also raises questions about what could have been, had her concerns been truly heard. Princess Diana's ability to communicate through writing was one of her most powerful tools. Whether in personal letters, diary entries, or secret interviews, her words carried emotions that revealed what she truly felt behind the polished public image. The letter to Prince Philip, which has now come to light, serves as another crucial piece of her story, one that provides insight into how she navigated the storm of her royal life. Given Philip's history of corresponding with Diana, this letter is a significant addition to their known exchanges. His previous letters had urged her to reconsider the direction of her marriage, offering a mix of concern and tradition-driven advice. Diana's response, however, might have been her way of setting the record straight, making it known that she had reached a breaking point. Understanding Diana's state of mind at the time she wrote this letter requires revisiting the months leading up to her separation from Charles. By the early 1990s, Diana had transformed from a quiet young bride to a woman determined to make her voice heard. She had grown increasingly independent in her royal role, often taking on causes that other family members had overlooked. Her humanitarian work, particularly her campaign to remove landmines and her advocacy for AIDS awareness, set her apart from the rest of the monarchy. Yet, while the public adored her, the royal household struggled to control the way she engaged with the media. This tension was one of the driving forces behind her decision to contribute to the book Diana, Her True Story, in 1992, which shocked the world with its raw portrayal of her unhappiness. Diana had realized by this time that she could no longer rely on the institution to protect her. Her marriage had become unsalvageable, and she felt increasingly isolated from the royal family. The book, though published as an unauthorized biography, was in fact the result of Diana secretly recording her thoughts and passing them to journalist Andrew Morton. In those recordings, she openly discussed the emotional toll of being married to a man who was in love with another woman. She described her eating disorder, her struggles with depression, and how she had tried to seek help within the palace only to be met with indifference. The book's release marked a turning point. Not only did it expose the reality behind the fairy tale, but it also made Diana a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer willing to silently endure the constraints of royal life. The impact of the book was profound, and it led to immediate consequences. The monarchy, which had long operated under a policy of keeping personal matters private, was shaken by the revelations. The Queen's patience with the ongoing crisis began to wear thin, and by late 1992, Charles and Diana's separation was formally announced. It was a moment that had been years in the making, but it did not bring Diana the peace she may have hoped for. Instead, the months that followed saw her subjected to increased scrutiny. The public and the media dissected every move she made, and the royal family grew more distant from her. While she retained her title as Princess of Wales, she was gradually being pushed out of the circle of influence within the palace. It was during this period that Prince Philip's letters to Diana surfaced. Unlike other members of the family, Philip had taken a direct approach in communicating with her. Some of his letters displayed a level of understanding, even acknowledging that his son had handled the marriage poorly. However, his messages also reinforced the expectation that Diana should find a way to make things work, despite the deep unhappiness she had already expressed. Philip had been raised in a generation where personal sacrifice was seen as a duty, and he expected his children and their spouses to uphold the same principles. He had endured his own challenges as the Queen's consort, always walking a fine line between fulfilling his role and maintaining his own sense of identity. Perhaps this is why he believed Diana should have been able to navigate the pressures of her position. But for Diana, the problem was not just about duty, it was about survival. Diana's own letters and interviews paint a picture of a woman who felt trapped in a system that valued appearance over well-being. In her secret tapes, she spoke of how the stress of her marriage had triggered her bulimia, a disorder that she battled for years. She described moments when she felt completely alone, even when surrounded by people, and how she often had to put on a brave face while suffering in silence. It was in one of these recordings that she admitted to feeling like the walls were closing in, as though she had no control over her own destiny. This overwhelming sense of powerlessness is likely what led her to write to Philip, hoping that someone within the family would listen to her concerns without judgment. What exactly did Diana hope to achieve by writing to Philip? Given the context of her previous interviews and letters, it is possible that she was looking for clarity on what her role would be after separating from Charles. She had spent over a decade as a central figure in the royal family, yet she now found herself in a gray area, no longer Charles's wife in the public eye, but still the mother of his children and a globally recognized figure. Unlike other royal divorces, which had largely been handled quietly, hers was unfolding under the harsh glare of the media. Perhaps she was seeking reassurance that she would not be erased from the royal narrative, or that she would still be given the respect she felt she deserved. Philip, for all his formalities, had at times shown a willingness to break protocol when necessary. Though he had been a firm enforcer of royal traditions, he had also displayed a sharp understanding of when change was inevitable. He had seen firsthand how the monarchy had evolved over the decades and had been instrumental in modernizing certain aspects of its operation. If Diana's letter to him was, in fact, an appeal for understanding, there is a chance that he may have at least considered her concerns. However, Diana was also aware that Philip's influence had its limits. While he held sway over family matters, the final decisions often rested with the Queen. It is unclear whether her letter led to any significant conversations behind the scenes, but what is certain is that by the time Diana and Charles's divorce was finalized in August 1996, her connection to the monarchy had been permanently altered. Despite being officially divorced, Diana remained in the public eye more than ever. Her newfound independence allowed her to take control of her life in ways she never could before, yet it also left her vulnerable. Without the palace's protection, she became an even greater target for the press, her every move documented and analyzed. She continued her humanitarian work with renewed focus, using her platform to raise awareness for causes that were deeply personal to her. At the same time, she faced growing challenges as she tried to navigate a world that was both freer and more uncertain than the one she had left behind. As the months passed, Diana's public persona continued to shift. No longer bound by the expectations of royal life, she began to redefine her identity on her own terms. Her charitable efforts took her across the world, and she started to build a life that for the first time in years was truly hers. Yet, despite all the progress she had made, there were still unresolved questions about her place within the larger narrative of the royal family. Had her letter to Philip been a final attempt to bridge that gap? Had she been seeking some kind of assurance that she would not be cast aside entirely? These questions remain open-ended, but they add another layer to the story of a woman who spent much of her life trying to be heard. The discovery of this letter does not change what we already know about Diana's struggles, but it does reinforce just how deeply she was affected by the circumstances surrounding her. It serves as yet another reminder that behind the glamorous public appearances and global admiration, she was a woman who wrestled with profound challenges. The fact that she felt the need to reach out in writing suggests that, even in her most independent moments, she was still searching for something, perhaps closure, perhaps understanding, or perhaps just a moment of honesty in a world that had often denied her that. Diana's search for understanding had always been met with resistance within the royal family. She had long realized that speaking openly about her struggles was not the way things were done in the monarchy, yet she had never been someone to simply accept silence. Writing to Prince Philip may have been one of her final efforts to gain clarity about her place within the institution, but whether it changed anything for her remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that as she distanced herself further from royal life, the weight of public scrutiny did not lessen. If anything, it intensified. Even after her divorce from Charles was finalized in August 1996, Diana remained one of the most followed and photographed figures in the world. Every move she made, every public appearance, and every relationship she pursued became front-page news. The absence of royal security meant she was more vulnerable than ever, yet she refused to live her life in hiding. Her humanitarian work continued to define her, and she immersed herself in causes that mattered to her most. From her efforts to destigmatize AIDS to her groundbreaking campaign against landmines, Diana had found a purpose that extended far beyond the confines of royal expectations. Yet, despite the newfound freedom, the constant presence of the media was a double-edged sword. It allowed her to bring attention to the causes she cared about, but it also meant she had little privacy. This relentless attention also extended to her personal life. Her romantic relationships became a subject of endless speculation, with the press scrutinizing every aspect of her interactions. Whether it was her time spent with British heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, whom she reportedly referred to as the love of her life, or her later publicized relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed, Diana's private affairs were rarely her own. The royal family had long been wary of her media presence, and as she became more independent, they distanced themselves even further. Diana's ability to control her own narrative was both a strength and a vulnerability, as it placed her in a unique yet isolating position. She was no longer part of the monarchy, yet she was still deeply intertwined with its legacy. This brings further weight to the significance of her letter to Prince Philip. By the time she wrote it, she had already taken several bold steps to reclaim her independence. Yet something had still compelled her to reach out. Perhaps it was unfinished business, a need to express herself one last time to someone who had been a key figure in the royal structure. While Philip's known letters to Diana show that he had engaged with her concerns to some extent, there is little evidence that their exchanges ever led to meaningful change. The royal family's approach to Diana's struggles had largely remained the same, contained within palace walls, discussed behind closed doors but never fully addressed in the way she had hoped. Had Diana remained within the monarchy, perhaps she would have continued to challenge the institution from within, much as she had during her marriage. But outside of it, she was now operating on her own, and that presented its own set of challenges. While she had more control over her life, she was also more exposed. The press followed her more aggressively than ever before, and with no official royal status to shield her, she had to navigate this attention largely on her own. It is possible that in her letter to Philip, she was seeking some reassurance that despite her official separation from the royal family, she would still be given a level of respect and protection. After all, she was still the mother of the future king, a role that carried immense significance regardless of her marital status. The months following her divorce were a time of transformation for Diana. She continued to redefine herself, both in the public eye and in her private life. She deepened her charitable efforts, traveling to Angola to raise awareness about landmines, a campaign that would later contribute to the international treaty banning their use. She also spent time forging new personal relationships, attempting to navigate a life outside the rigid expectations that had once confined her. But despite her efforts to move forward, there was always a lingering sense that she was still connected to the world she had left behind. The royal family's silence regarding her activities spoke volumes, and while they no longer had an official say in her life, their influence still loomed over her. Whether Prince Philip ever responded to her letter remains unknown. What is known is that Diana's concerns about her future were not misplaced. The intense media attention surrounding her would continue to escalate, ultimately playing a devastating role in the events that led to her tragic death in August 1997. The question of whether the royal family could have done more to support her remains a matter of debate. While Philip and others had engaged with her at certain points, the overall response to her struggles had been one of detachment. The monarchy had been built on stability and control, and Diana's unpredictable nature had always been a challenge to that order. As the world reflects on the significance of her letter, it serves as yet another reminder of the battles Diana faced throughout her life. She had fought to be heard, to carve out an identity for herself beyond the expectations placed upon her. Her legacy remains as powerful as ever, but the resurfacing of this letter raises new questions. Was it a plea for understanding, a final attempt to bridge the gap between herself and the institution that had once embraced her? Or was it simply an expression of closure, a way to put into words what had long been left unsaid? While the full details may never be known, one thing is certain. Diana's words, whether spoken or written, continue to shape the way the world remembers her. Diana's voice never truly faded, even after she stepped away from the royal family. Her ability to connect with people, to make them feel as though she understood their struggles, ensured that her influence extended far beyond the confines of Buckingham Palace. The discovery of her letter to Prince Philip only reinforces the idea that she was still seeking clarity, perhaps even a final acknowledgement, about her place in the monarchy. Whether she expected a reply or not, her decision to write suggests that she still had unfinished thoughts about her departure from royal life. It was a moment of transition, a time when she was no longer bound by royal expectations, yet still unable to fully escape their impact. The months leading up to her tragic death were a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She had spent time focusing on her humanitarian efforts, pushing forward with her campaign to ban landmines, and using her platform to raise awareness for causes that had long been overlooked. At the same time, her personal life remained under intense scrutiny, with the press dissecting every move she made. She had embraced a new chapter, but she was still navigating a world that was both liberating and unrelenting. Her connection to the royal family, despite the formal separation, remained unbroken. She was still the mother of two princes, still one of the most recognized women in the world, and still a figure whose life was analyzed at every turn. If Diana had been searching for reassurance in her letter, she never got the chance to fully see where her path would lead. Her tragic death in August 1997 cut her journey short, leaving behind a legacy that continues to be debated and celebrated. In the aftermath of her passing, the royal family faced intense criticism for their handling of the situation, with many believing they had failed to properly acknowledge the depth of the public's grief. Prince Philip, like the Queen, remained largely silent in the immediate days following her death, a reaction that only fueled speculation about how deeply they had understood Diana's struggles. When the Queen finally addressed the nation, it was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that many believed had been influenced by Philip's understanding that the monarchy needed to show compassion. Diana's letter to Philip, like many of her written words, serves as a reminder that she was never content with being silenced. She had fought to be seen, to be understood, to have her experiences acknowledged. While the contents of her letter remain private, its existence alone speaks volumes. It suggests that even as she was building a life outside the monarchy, there was still a part of her that sought recognition from within it. Her story, filled with moments of triumph and heartbreak, continues to shape conversations about the role of the royal family and the expectations placed upon those who marry into it. Decades later, her words still matter, and her legacy remains as powerful as ever. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.